Do you really need to go out and spend $500 on a BFS combo? Do I need special line or can I just use the normal stuff? What rods are the best? Where do we even start with lures? I have been BFS fishing since 2019 and today we're gonna break down everything that I would buy if I started BFS fishing today, because there are a lot of overwhelming choices out there when it comes to BFS fishing. So let's start with one of the most overlooked categories when it comes to BFS fishing, lures. So let's start this off by talking about one of the best BFS lures, this giant 7-inch glide bait. Joking aside, lures I think get slept on a little bit when it comes to BFS. Sure, we talk about them and they're obviously important, but do you need to go out and spend a lot of money on BFS lures? Typically you pay what I call the BFS Premium when it comes to lures, which essentially is you pay a lot of money for something little bitty. Case in point, these Megabass jerkbaits like this X80 Junior trick darter, this thing is tiny. These things are almost as much as their bigger counterpart. On the flip side, you've got this little Rebel Trackdown that's like 1/10 of the price. So do you really need to go out and spend a lot of money on these expensive ones when you've got these? And that's one of the things that we're gonna dive into here. I'm gonna talk about some of my favorite lures from a budget standpoint, because I don't necessarily know that if you're just getting started in BFS, if you need to go out and spend a fortune on baits. Here's why. There is a lure brand out there that I think is vastly underrated when it comes to BFS lures, and that is Rebel. In this box, I've got so many Rebel crankbaits, from the Rebel Helgermite to the tiny Pop R's. And then they've even got all their famous bug baits like this popping cricket. They make a crankbait version. They're all very light. This is one of the ones that I like a lot, which is kind of a Karashi style bait. And I say that this predates it by a large margin. So Rebel, I think, is one of those sleeper brands when it comes to BFS. You can get a very good arsenal of crankbaits, top waters from Heddon. Heddon is another brand I think does really good, you know, like this little tiny torpedo. This thing is killer for smallmouth. All of these baits are under that like $7 threshold. I think the most you might end up spending is like $7.99 on one of the Pop R's. And it really just depends on where you get them. I think if you go into any Walmart that has a good fishing section, you can find Rebel, Heddon, Arbogast crankbaits that will throw really well on BFS and won't break the bank. And there's a reason why they've been around a long time. They catch fish and they're really good. So if you're wanting to get into BFS and you spend a lot of money on a rod and reel and you want to build out an arsenal, you want to get some smaller stuff, you cannot go wrong with some of the Rebel stuff. I mean, it is just lights out. Especially look at that little crawfish. If you've watched my creek wading video I did a few weeks back, we were catching crawfish that looked almost identical to that. Now, are the premium lures worth it? That's the hard part. Taking a step back here and looking at things, as a self-proclaimed Megabass guy, you guys know I like Megabass jerkbaits. If you go into my office, hanging behind me is a zillion Megabass jerkbaits. I think these are really good. They're really expensive though. These are like 20 bucks for these little guys. Really effective, they're quality, they have really good action. When you buy a Megabass jerkbait like this, you've almost got to throw this on BFS, or at least Bass Finesse. It is a very light lure, so really good for trout, but smallmouth will crush this thing in certain times of the year. It's got good components on it, but how does it perform versus, you know, the Rebel versions? You know, you've got like the little trace down, which sinks, whereas this one's more of a spinning action. So I think if you're gonna go out and spend a lot of money on the high-end hard baits that Megabass makes, Jackal, any of those fancy ones, I would really advise you to look at some of the Rebel stuff before you make the dive, because there are counterparts to each of these. And then if you decide that you really like BFS, if BFS is really for you, or maybe you're watching this video just looking for tips, I mean, they're really good. They are really good, and I've caught a lot of fish on both of these. But when it comes to like pure performance, I mean, you cannot go wrong with a Megabass Karashi. I think the Karashi, in my humble opinion, is one of the greatest BFS lures ever made because it is versatile. You can run it as top water, mid column, you can jerk it, you can sit it, you can float it, you can do anything with it. And I think if you want to buy a premium high-end BFS lure, the Megabass Karashi is one of the first ones that I dive into. Either this bigger one, which is the 80, which I would say kind of leans almost to more of a traditional jerkbait weight because this thing is pretty heavy. But the small Karashis get the job done. So I think that one is well worth the money. The jerkbaits, maybe not so much. So I struggled for years trying to find what I would say the perfect BFS lure. And I think this right here might be the closest I've ever gotten to it. This is the Z-Man Micro Max chatterbait. And they technically call it the Micro Max BFS chatterbait. Don't get it confused with the Mini Max, which is this. This is like a 1/4 ounce bait. I think that 1/4, 3/8, and 1/2. This is not a BFS lure. Could you throw it on bass finesse? Sure. This is a lot lighter. I like this in 3/16 and 1/4. I think I actually like the 3/16 the most, but this right here is a fish catching machine. You're gonna catch catfish on this. You're gonna catch panfish on this. And this black and blue one, I have caught so many smallmouth on this. And I'm not talking little bitty smallmouth. I'm talking quality smallmouth. You put a little trailer on the back of this, trim the skirt a little bit. You've got one of the most deadly BFS lures, I think, on the market. It is versatile, it's cheap, and I like it a lot. So if you're not a big treble hook guy, you know, Rebel tends to lean towards more creature, treble-y baits. Heddon makes a lot of good top water baits, but when it comes to a good single hook bait, I was always unhappy with the BFS offerings. Now I do want to do an honorable mention to the Booyah Pond Magic. They make a couple of those that I think are really good for BFS. I personally like throwing the Booyah Covert Finesse spinnerbaits on bass finesse when you're fishing a heavier BFS. That's a really good option. I think it's just under 3/8 of an ounce. Those things are a little hard to throw on conventional, so I like throwing those on BFS, but I think that these BFS micro chatterbaits, they don't break the bank, and they're quality, and they catch fish. And they catch good fish at that. And if I was building out a collection, I'd definitely get a dark and a light one just to have them in there. And I think you'd be surprised, especially if you're using the Z-Man trailers, how long one of these will last you, especially if you invest in a hook sharpener. Keep those hooks sharp, guys. As you can see, my box does have a lot of variety in it, and all these are really affordable, but it does add up quickly. If you were to sit here and put all these together, you'd be looking at some really expensive stuff. And I know I've got some outliers in here, like the Mike Bucca Trick Shad Jr., the BFS one. That's a little bit expensive, to be honest. I mean, I think these are like 15 bucks, which we could argue all day whether or not it's worth it. But I think if you start at the Rebel one, you're really putting yourself at an advantage because you can spend more money on a rod and reel, pick up maybe one in each category, and you're good to go. But I want to point out something that we haven't talked about, and that's a rooster tail. Rooster tail might be the best fish catching lure ever made. I recently did a Facebook poll, and a lot of you guys agreed that a rooster tail just plain gets fish. And I think if you're going to go out and start BFS fishing and you don't want to spend a lot of money, this is an obvious first choice. Rooster tail is just gonna catch anything that swims, especially if you want to target panfish and bass. I think you're at a pretty good spot that a rooster tail will catch them. Now, if you're getting into BFS to catch things like trout, this is also a really good option. So there are a lot of good budget-friendly BFS options out there if you don't want to go out and break the bank. Reels, I think, are where a lot of people get tripped up on BFS. Because what actually allows you to throw a 1/16 ounce lure? It's not really magic, it's just low spool inertia. That's why you see the shallow spools with really specialized bearings and specialized braking systems that make it able to throw light lures with low startup inertia without backlashing. It's a whole sort of ecosystem. That's why you see a lot of people use reels like this, which is the Metanium Shallow Spool Edition. They'll often upgrade different components of it and it will throw really light stuff. Now, it's not a true BFS reel, but it does have a shallow spool with low startup inertia and a really good braking system. So does that mean it's a BFS reel? That's probably a different video. Let's kind of break down budget reels because we've got them in front of us. This is Cast King's offering. Which is the best version of the Kestrel? Well, I think when you look at the Kestrel, this is the best one they've ever made, the Ultimate, but it's $300. Then they came out with this one, which is the SE. So it was actually cheaper than its predecessor. I think from a value standpoint, you cannot beat the Cast King Kestrel SE. At under $100 after you use all the discount codes and sales and stuff like that, you can usually get this pretty cheap. This is a really good reel. If I was just starting out and I wanted to spend as little money as possible to get a good reel rod combo, this is going to be the reel I really take a hard look at. Now, I personally like the original Kestrel a little bit better. I think it's really hard to tell these apart. It's also a much more modest looking reel, and I know looks matter to a lot of people. So this is like a metallic-y purple, whereas this one is just your classic gray. It's got some orange accents. I believe this one comes in more speeds as well, but I think if I had to choose between these two, it'd be really tough. But since this one is like $20 more than the SE and you get a couple more bearings, but for all practical purposes, I mean, it's fairly similar. I mean, it's literally just worse components in one, a few less bearings than this one. So technically this one has a lighter spool. It claims that you can throw lighter stuff on the cheaper one, whereas this one is just slightly heavier. So technically speaking, it takes more startup inertia. It's very minor in my experience. Also, the frame is made out of a different components than this one. I think if I had to, be splitting hairs and we're going for the ultimate budget reel in this category, I'm going with this, the Cast King Kestrel SE. But I can't talk about budget reels without talking about the Arc Gravity. And this is why this category was so tough for me to sort of dive into, because I feel like at the $100 price point, the true budget standpoint, and when I'm saying budget, I think $99 is the budget reel in 2026. Unfortunately, that sucks to say. I've used some of the cheaper ones. I've used the Cast King Zephyr. I am not a fan. I think the Kestrel is the way to go if you're going Cast King. And I think Arc, with their new BF Avid, which I've done a ton of videos on this as well, it's like a 1A and a 1B. You could literally interchange these based on whatever you want. This is a little bit lighter. This one is a little bit more, feels better in hand. I think the drag on the Kestrel is a little bit better, but I think the braking system on this is a little bit more superior. I like the components a little bit better on this, and it's probably because this one is lighter, so they kind of cut corners on it. This one has stood up the test of time. I've caught a lot of fish on it. I've used this one for about 5 months without any issues. Now, I will say the drag might be a little stiff when you compare it to some of the other ones. Having caught a lot of fish on it, doesn't really bother me, but it is something that I noticed after a lot of use. The drag was a little stiffer than some of the other ones, but at $100 and $100, there's discount codes for both of these in the description. You can't really go wrong. So really just going to come down to preference. I think they're almost identical in performance. One interesting thing about the Arc BF Avid though, when you compare it to these two reels, is it actually has a much lighter spool. The spool on this one is almost, I think, a whole gram lighter than those. So technically speaking, this one has the lowest startup inertia needed out of the budget lineup. So if that's something that you're interested in, technically speaking, this one beats those two on a spool weight. I think one advantage to this one over some of the Cast King ones, I feel like the braking tolerances on this are a little bit more consistent. As you move up on the tension knob and the braking, it's kind of a gradual curve. With the Kestrels, it's kind of all over the place. There's almost like cliffs where you've got it really loose, and then there's like a dead zone there where it doesn't perform as well. Once you do get it dialed in, it's not an issue. This is probably the easiest reel I've ever used far as a setup standpoint. So from a beginner standpoint, this is a hard to beat reel. But I think on a top end standpoint, this one, the Kestrel SC and Kestrel Original probably have this one beat. But if you're using it for just light bass lures, you could close your eyes and just pick one of these and you're probably gonna be happy. So when it comes to budget, these are my two winners, the Arc Gravity BF Avid and the Cast King Kestrel SC. Let's jump up to one that we're gonna talk about again later in this video, and that's the Conquest BFS. I've done dedicated videos to this reel. You guys are probably sick of seeing round reels pop up on the channel. This is the best BFS reel I've ever used. Now, I've never used the high-end Daiwa Tatula Airs and all those, like the Stream Wolf Customs. I've never actually used one of those. I've mainly just used Shimano's higher end stuff, and I love this reel. I like it because it's a sturdy reel that doesn't feel like it buckles on the bigger fish. It's got a really smooth drag. I can use this for trout, and I can use this for like 3/8 ounce spinner baits on the river for smallmouth when I need to throw something lighter, or like a 1/4 ounce underspin for smallmouth, or like a Ned rig. There's a lot of overlap between this and something like the Conquest SE, which stands for shallow spool, or even like the Metanium SE that we talked about, while still being able to do a lot of those lower end stuff. This to me is the Ferrari of BFS reels, and if money was not a thing, and we're gonna call back to this later in the video, you would see me owning this reel. So if you're on the fence about this, you're like, should I really spend a lot of coin on something this high end? It's worth it, but you really have to judge whether or not it's worth it to you from a value standpoint. Not everybody wants to go out and spend a ton of coin on a BFS reel. I think all of these are serviceable, but I feel like I would be lying to you guys if I didn't say I like this reel, because I've used it a ton. You see it pop up in the content a lot. So if you do want to go all in on a BFS reel and you want to buy once, cry once, this is going to be hard to beat in the Shimano Calcutta Conquest. So where do we even start with rods? I've owned a lot of BFS rods in my day. When people ask me, would you rather spend money on a rod and a reel, typically from a conventional bait casting standpoint or spinning reel standpoint, I'm gonna tell you rod. But with BFS, I actually think it's a little different. Rod and reel combos are really important. That's because these two things work together in unison a lot more fluidly than traditional bait casters and spinning rods. The action of a rod varies so differently that if you get the wrong rod with a really good BFS reel, you're going to struggle to cast these light lures. When you're using such a specialized technique, you gotta have the right rod. I cannot tell you how many times I have bought a BFS rod in my day and it didn't really work. For instance, you see a light rod, like we're gonna use an example, the Loomis 851, which they don't even make it anymore, which is a jigging and warming rod. I thought it would be a great BFS rod. Guess what? Even though it can, quote, throw lighter lures, it was garbage. And I really struggled when I first started BFS fishing because I was using the wrong rod. Now, rods are a weird category with BFS because typically speaking, you hear me saying this, you think you gotta spend a lot of money, but it's kind of weird. I think you can find some really good BFS rods that are quite affordable, and it's not like you're getting junk, you're getting actual high quality stuff. So let's dive into some of my favorites, and you might notice there are some in here that have cork on the handle. They're under $100. So let's take a look at a couple of these and I'll kind of break down some of my favorite combos after we get done with this. So when I first started BFS fishing, one of the first quote BFS rods I bought after I bought that crappie rod I talked about was the Shimano Sensolite. This is technically a crappie rod slash panfish rod that Shimano made. They don't make this anymore, but you can still find it. This retails, I think, for $50. I got mine for $40. So if you can find a Shimano Sensolite, this one is the 7-foot light. I think that this is definitely a little on the heavy side, but it's really good for what I call bass finesse. I think that you will be able to throw any of those lures we mentioned earlier, but you will struggle to throw the really light like crankbaits or like crappie jigs and stuff like that. Even though this is quote a crappie slash panfish rod, I think that it kind of struggles on the real low end of things. I think that this is really good at that like 1/5 ounce range. I know that's a really odd number, but like if you're throwing like the medium size Rebel crankbaits, I think this does really good. I've thrown some really small crappie crankbaits on here. I think that when you get down to the 1/16, this really struggles, but it's going to depend a lot on your reel and your line on how well you're going to perform with this. I've caught a lot of big fish on this. I love this rod. So if you can find a Shimano Sensolite in 2026, it might be one of the best under $50 rods I've ever used. Now, like I said, it shades more towards the bass fishing aspect, but it is a really good rod. This is a new one I actually just picked up here. This is the Arc Gravity. This is their BF, which stands for Bass Finesse. This is actually designed to throw like soft plastics. So like those mini koikis we talked about, things like the Gizmo, the bug baits, which we had a segment about that in this video that I ended up cutting. It's on the cutting room floor, but if you've ever heard of a Gizmo, this is it right here, a little bug bait. This is a great rod for it. I've actually had some good success with this over the past few weeks, tossing it on just straight 7-pound braid with a 6-pound mono leader so that it floats. This is a great rod for that because it's extra fast and it's a 6/8. So it's not like super short. Some BFS rods can be a little bit on the short side. I would definitely recommend this rod if you're a soft plastics person. 6/8 ultralight, extra fast, Arc Gravity BF, Bass Finesse. So moving on, I got another Arc rod here that's not technically BFS. This is the Sniper 2. This is a great moving bait rod. This is a little bit more expensive though. If I was going to kind of shade where I'm throwing a little bit of everything, this is a 6/8 ML. This is technically not a BFS rod, but I think that if you're gonna throw single hook baits with a little mix of treble, maybe dabble in some soft plastics, this is a good one. I will warn you though, this is $200. I have a code in the description if you wanna check it out. It'll save you a little bit on that rod. That's a really good versatile rod. You've seen me catch quite a few fish on the channel using that paired with the Arc Gravity BF Avid, the new one, which we talked about earlier in the video. So those are three really good options, but I'm gonna give you guys the ultimate budget option. And I think if I started BFS fishing today, this would be the rod I bought first if I'm just trying to dip my toes into the water and get started. And that is the King Kestrel. I have caught hundreds and hundreds of fish on not only this one, but the 6.9 Light, which is one of my favorite BFS rods because it's really good at fishing the upper column of BFS. And then this is its little baby brother. This is a 6.8 Ultralight. This is much different. This is a little bit more of your traditional BFS rod. But what I like about this rod is that it's a 3-piece rod. I am a huge fan of travel rods when it comes to BFS. And that's because I can slip this in my sleeve with a reel and I can take it with me everywhere. I took one of these on vacation. I take it with me in the truck sometimes. That way I don't have a giant rod in there taking up space. If I ever want to stop, I can put this together with a BFS rod and you could fish anywhere, catch any fish. I've caught, 5-6 pound bass on this rod. I've caught a catfish on this rod. I've caught a big smallmouth on this rod. So say what you will about casting, I think they are really good in the BFS category when it comes to rods and reels. Maybe not so much on some of their other rods. I've used some that I like, I use some that I don't like, but I can say that I do like the Kestrel. It's got good action. They come in a couple different sizing and powers and stuff like that. So I can recommend the 6.8 Ultralight and the 6.9 Light. Those are my two favorite. You can look through the catalog and see what you want. But at, I think after discount, these are around $70, maybe less. It really just depends. The price varies on them a lot. This is a really good value that I think pairs really well with any of the reels we mentioned earlier in the video. So from a budget standpoint, if I'm just getting started, I would definitely recommend the Kestrel. But like I said, all these rods work exceedingly well. So let's say money is no object and you're willing to spend whatever you want to get a combo that you feel like is the best. Maybe you're watching this video and you've already bought a lot of starter BFS stuff and you want to really dip your toes into it. We're going to talk about a reel and rod combo that I have used more than any BFS combo that I've ever owned, and that is the Conquest BFS paired with the Megabest Triza ALO. Now the Triza ALO is a 3-piece travel rod that breaks down and is super packable. You can take it with you wherever you want. In fact, I have the hard case and I have a soft case. The Conquest BFS is a unicorn in the BFS space. I feel like you can do so much with this reel. And the reason why is it's versatile. You can use it for bigger stuff. It's got a lot of power. It's got a really smooth drag. It can throw super light. It can throw super heavy, and it can throw that in between. So I think if you want a really versatile reel, this is a great one. I imported mine from Japan. You can get it from around $300. If you buy domestically, you're going to spend a pretty penny, well over $400 to $500. The rod I got from the Hookup Tackle, this thing will set you back at around $300, maybe more, depending on the sales that you tend to catch it on. Super great rod. What I like about this rod too is you can push up to the higher weights. I've thrown a Vision 110 Junior on this and I caught a absolute slaunch of a smallmouth on it a couple winters ago. So I've got a lot of miles put into this rod. I've actually owned 2 of them at this point. So really good rod. I love that it's a travel rod, but it is on the pricier side. So if budget was no concern to me and I was just going to go out and buy the combo, for me, it's going to be this one. I think it does struggle a little bit with some of the single hook baits, not necessarily like soft plastics. I've thrown like weedless Neds and those sorts of things on it, and it hasn't been that bad. Not my favorite, but it gets the job done. But like a spinner bait or even the micro chatter bait, this is not my favorite rod for that. I've caught a lot of fish on the micro chatter bait with that. That being said, but having tried some of the other ones, I think they're much stronger in that suit. I think if you're gonna throw like small top waters, like those little premium Megabest ones, little small glide baits, anything that has a treble hook, this is awesome for that. So this is by far my favorite combo, and I love that you can really dip down into those like light rooster tails and fish for trout with it. I've caught a lot of trout on this as well. So if money is no object, Calcutta Conquest BFS plus the Megabest Triza ALO travel rod can't be beat. So let's talk about something that's a little bit boring, but very important: line. When do you choose braid for BFS? When do you choose a fluorocarbon for BFS? Should you go straight mono? What mono should I use? Those are all really important questions. Because you're casting something really light, guess what? Line size matters a ton. So if you're a beginner and you're first getting into this, I'm gonna suggest one thing, and that is going with an 8 to 6 pound fluorocarbon line. Now I've even got some 7 pound floating around here somewhere. I think 7's a good middle ground as well. But I think if you get like that 6 to 8 pound line, it's light enough that it's gonna throw a lot of stuff. If you're gonna be doing more light stuff like crappie jigs and those small crankbaits, you might wanna consider using like a 6 pound fluorocarbon. I think that most work pretty good. I like P-line for BFS. It's not my favorite for other things, but I think that it has the right softness, yet still firm enough that I feel like it casts really well, and it doesn't dig down a bunch. The Seagar Basics line is shockingly good for BFS because it's a nice, cheap line that gets the job done. But I think one of the big mistakes is everybody sleeps on monofilament line for BFS. Now, mono is notoriously way more unruly, and it can be a little bit harder to use because it gets more memory. It's got a lot more stretch than fluorocarbon. I don't really think that's a big deal with BFS. 8 and 6 pound mono might be one of the most slept on BFS lines, period. Because this does two things. It works pretty well for any sort of moving bait or single hook bait, but it works really well for top water. And if you're gonna be throwing like treble hook top waters or anything like that, mini buzz baits, you want something that has a little bit of buoyancy, and mono floats, so it makes sense to have that. If you talk to any ultralight fishermen, you know, I know a lot that love wading creeks and they throw specifically mono. I think this right here might be one of my favorite BFS lines, and this is just the Sunline. This is 6 pound mono. I've thrown this in a lot of videos. I don't talk about it a ton. I use this for leaders a lot if I do braid to leader. It is a really good line. But I think if you're someone who is just trying to dip your toes into it, a 6 to 8 pound fluorocarbon might be up your alley, but I do think mono can be very versatile if you kind of understand what you're getting into. So a lot of people won't recommend mono for BFS. You'll see a lot of guides that'll say either do braid or fluorocarbon. I think mono can kind of bridge the gap between those two, and if you're going to be throwing a lot of stuff, it's worth considering this. This is the one I like. This is Sunline mono. It's not super cheap, but it's not like overpriced, so 6 pound will go a long way. But let's talk about braid. So I primarily throw on braid. I like doing straight braid a lot of times. If I'm throwing something like the Karashi and I'm just going to be like burning it really fast, I'm not worrying about the fish sitting there looking at it. I don't fish a lot of clear waters per se. I do fish them occasionally, but for the most part, a lot of my creeks are a little bit stained. A lot of our rivers up here are a little bit stained. So I like doing straight braid for a lot of techniques, especially like those micro chatterbaits. This is the Euro tackle braid. This is 8 pound micro finesse braid. This stuff's really good. It's got the right softness while still being stiff enough. The only problem with this, and this is the big reoccurring theme with a lot of braids with BFS reels, is sometimes it can dig down really bad. When you get these light braids, when you cast, it'll dig down in there and you'll get those really annoying backlashes that you have to dig out. It's not as bad with BFS as it is like conventional tackle, but it is something to look out for. Also, when you're getting line this thin, and it's gonna be hard to see it in the video, this is like 1 pound line diameter. It is tiny, it's 0.0085. I don't know what the PE rating is on that, but basically it can dig into the sides of the spool on BFS reels. So that line will get behind the spool and it's a whole nightmare. If you've had it happen, you know exactly what I mean, but it's so thin that it can dig in there if it gets a little bit of overrun. I've actually had it happen more on the Kestrel than any other reel, but that is another point, is you don't really want to be overloading your BFS reels. There's a question I get a lot. How much line do I put on there? I usually aim for about at max 80% capacity, and that includes like a backing, like a mono backing if I'm putting braid on there. Mostly because you're not making really long casts anyways. I don't find that line capacity is that big of a deal, but you don't want your spool to get super heavy. And I think best practice is a lot of people will tell you to underfill your BFS reels. You don't want it spilling over the edges. I think if you do that, the line diameter getting in the spool is a non-issue, but if you're getting that happening a lot with braid, typically it's because you have too much line on it. So this isn't super cheap and it's kind of specialized. I think this is a better middle ground, and it's not even a BFS line. It's actually one I discovered on accident. This is Power Pro Super Slick V2. I like this in 8 and 10 pounds. So 10 pound I think is a really good starter braid size for a lot of people. If you want to just go straight braid and not think about it, not tie leaders or anything, I like 10 pound because it can throw any bait. And you're not gonna get the stretch, so you need to have the rod to compensate for it if you're throwing a treble hook bait, but soft enough where it's not like really gritty and grindy on the cast and you still get the smooth cast, but it's still got the stiffness that you need to throw a BFS. A lot of the BFS braids are a little bit stiffer. What I mean is it's got enough rigidity where it will actually pull off the spool when you're making those light lure casts. Because sometimes with the soft braids, when you're making those casts, you get a lot of like waviness. So it'll do this on the cast as it comes off the spool and it hurts the cast. So there's a whole deep dive we could do on the rigidity of braid when it comes to BFS, but I find that this one right here, the V2 Super Slick, is a affordable. You can get a spool of this for a reasonable price, and it comes with 300 yards, so it'll last you. I mean, I've had this one for well over a year. We finally tapped it out, but that's filling up a lot of different reels with it. But I think this one's a good middle ground. But you know, if you want to go more specialized, there's a million of them out there. My overall preference is this one, but you will see me throwing straight 8-pound fluorocarbon quite a bit. So that's it. Those are some of the things I like. Those are some of the things I've learned. There is a lot in the world of BFS that we could talk for hours. I've spent the last 3 days making this video. There's tons more when it comes to BFS, but I think it can be overwhelming. And any of these products in this video are more than serviceable. I think the moral of the story when it comes to BFS, don't overthink it. There are a lot of conventional lures out there that you could go to the store and buy. I think if I was gonna invest most of my money, it's gonna be in a good rod, which you can get a good rod for under $100. And then you pick out a good reel in that $99 to $150 range. And then after that, it's all about just choosing the right line for your scenario. So it's actually quite simple when you really boil it down. I know it might seem overwhelming watching this video and hearing all the choices, but they all kind of work in unison. You have a good rod with a good reel and the proper line, you can cast pretty much anything you want. And you would be surprised how well some of the BFS techniques work when you're comparing it to something like an ultralight fishing. So BFS can be a lot of fun, and it can be really cheap if you really want to. You can get a really good combo for an affordable price. So let me know what you guys think on your favorite Bass Finesse rods, reels, lines, lures, because I know it's different for everybody. Don't sleep on those Rebel lures. I'm going to put a link to all the Rebel head and stuff down there, just a generic link. You can click that. I do have a code for that, which will save you a little bit on them. You can get them for a very affordable price. Rods, reels, lines, I'll link all those down there as well as much as I can. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and you found it informative, and I'll see you guys next time on the water.